And joining us today in our book talk segment, great to welcome two men who have written a book. If you like Hollywood and some of the behind-the-scenes stories, this is the book for you. It's called Of All the Gin Joints, Stumbling Through Hollywood History. We're joined today by Mark Bailey and Edward Hemingway. And gentlemen, great to have a chance to talk with you. How are you today?
Doing great. Thank you, Doug, for having us on.
Always,
thanks, Doug.
Yeah, always enjoyed reading about show business, and you got some great stories in this book, kind of combined with some of the great Hollywood night spots of years gone by. I guess some of them may still exist, but probably not in the same way, right?
Right. Actually, what we wanted to do, Doug, with this book was to really give people an opportunity to look back and kind of celebrate a Hollywood that is, disappeared or is rapidly disappearing, and to look at the lives of these stars that were all larger than life, or these, legendary watering holes or, hot spots, places like the Coconut Grove or Ciro's or the Trocadero, that are no longer around, and also to have some of the cocktails from those places, some of the cocktails that the stars love to drink. And so, it's really a chance to go back and celebrate all of that.
Yeah, you hear about some of those great nightclubs that you mentioned. If you just watched, the talk shows, the actors would come on and talk about them sometimes. And I guess Ciro's was a place where a lot of the great show business stars got their start. I know Sammy Davis Jr., I think he kind of broke through there. Martin and Lewis as well. So really had kind of the beginnings of the show business of the 20th century in those places, right?
Yeah, a lot of those places particularly, and then a lot of the places that also featured dance nights where, Joan Crawford, who was a big kind of dance figure around town before she became Joan Crawford. And so, it was, the places are part of that fabric. And, what happens is you read the book and it's written in a way with these sort of little nuggets of stories about different stars or venues or, or movie sets. You can pick the book up and read it for a little bit and put it down, and then pick it back up a couple of days later and kind of dip in and out of it. And, once you sort of, I think, have read a lot, what happens is you find you've learned a lot of fun stuff, kind of interesting sort of, side facts about Hollywood and history and cinema. And so it's really kind of a fun history in that way.
And this was before the time. I know there were those Enquirer-type magazines back then, but not to the extent that the gossip, shows on TV and all that is today. So a lot of these stories probably were more inside that people didn't know about, unless you kind of were in the business. But they're fun to read now, aren't they?
They are, and you didn't have the sort of TMZ and the 24-hour news and the paparazzi taking the photographs and, being inside places, clubs. When you were in these clubs, I think you were pretty protected. And another interesting aspect of it that's really fun to think about is, during the studio system, which was, really the first half of the last century, the studios had contracts with stars, and they were invested in protecting them and keeping their names out of the papers. And so you did have some machinery behind you in the studios and in the PR agents and such who worked really hard. If you're Clark Gable and you're going to get into, a car accident on Sunset, or you're Cary Grant, to get there and to keep, Spencer Tracy if you're getting in a fist fight in a bar, to get you the heck out of there and keep your name out of the press.
It is kind of amazing when you think of some of the stories that, we kind of know today about people in show business, and people don't really, blink at it. Now you read some of these stories about these actors and actresses that would have ruined a career back then, if the public knew some of these things that went on, right?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think that, in fact, now there's even, I would say, right, it's an interesting point now with less privacy, a heavier paparazzi present, and sort of this 24-hour news stuff. Stars are reported on, much, much more, have much less privacy, yet their careers recover more quickly than back then, where, the country as a whole, not Hollywood, but the country as a whole was much more puritanical, and you could have easily been derailed. There's a funny story about Robert Mitchum, who, in addition to, really being something of a drinker, also liked to smoke a lot of marijuana.
Yeah.
and the story of him back in the 50s, where the police raided a house he was having, I guess what they referred to as a reefer party. There was about 4 of them in the Hollywood Hills, and the police raided the house, and they arrest him, and they have the transcript from the arrest. They put him in the back of the car, and the police officer says, "Name," and he says, "Robert Mitchum." And then he says, "Occupation," and Mitchum says, "Former actor."
But yeah, whether you believe in smoking pot or not, that's irrelevant to the story. But look how that almost ruined his career. It didn't, but nowadays, I mean, people openly talk about it.
He went to jail for it. Yeah.
It's amazing how things have, maybe not for the better, but how things have changed. Let's talk about some of the other stories in the book. I know Tallulah Bankhead. I know there was a play written about her in her final years, where she had, kind of told some of the wild stories she had. But you got a good one in the book here. She was known as being kind of wild, right? A little crazy.
Yes, Tallulah Bankhead was a kind of original celebutante, as famous for being Tallulah Bankhead as she was for, her work on film and on stage. And she was a brassy, out there, bold living woman and starlet. And, she described herself as pure as driven slush. And so the story about her is at the Garden of Allah, which is one of those. The Garden of Allah was this legendary sort of, I guess, hotel, but they don't really have them like they used to anymore. It was sort of apartments where you could live for a period of time.
Like the Chateau Marmont?
Sort of like the Chateau Marmont, but people stayed there for months at a time. And they had a swimming pool there, and a lot of crazy antics went on around that, including Tallulah jumping into the pool and sort of playing the damsel in distress so she could get Johnny Weissmuller,
right,
who was the Olympic swimmer, and Tarzan, who was standing nearby to jump in to save her. And somehow they came out with her clothes shed and and Tarzan holding the naked socialite in his arms. So, yeah.
Anyway, I don't mean to ignore you. Apologize for that, but you did a lot of the great all the illustrations in the book, and great caricatures of these famous actors and actresses. That must have been kind of fun for you, right?
Yeah. Yes. No. Thank you. It was a lot of fun to do, and Mark, would keep sort of piling my desk with these incredible stories, and it was such an eye-opening thing to read about, and then it's really fun to go in and research the different people, the celebrities, and do these caricatures of them that I really wanted to touch on the subject of the book. So I made a point of having all the illustrations look like you're actually viewing them through the bottom of a whiskey glass.
Yeah.
There's something very sort of tipsy about them. Everything's a little bit askew, a little bit off. So I worked really hard on getting that look for the book, which I think is a really fun kind of look.
You kind of, when you read through the book again, see these pictures, and it brings back the point how actors and actresses of those days much more distinctive looking and sounding than today. I mean, we know the actors today, but by face maybe, but the voices were all distinct back then, and distinctive looks. Not that much not like today. A little different today, right?
Yeah, I think it's a little different. It is. There were different types, and you see it in both the women and in the men. Another interesting piece in who those actors are is that a lot of them were veterans. A lot of them had been people who had been to wars, and guys like Lee Marvin,
right,
and McQueen. And these folks were. Even at a younger age, there was something that was slightly more, I think, kind of masculine and kind of in a different sort of adult figure, kind of.
Yeah, I would say a lot of character, maybe a little more character back then too.
Yeah, they look probably older, not old, but older than their ages probably were, just because they went through all that stuff too. You're right.
Yeah, certainly.
And I think that in the sort of partying and the drinking and how when they came upon fame they handled that, there is a sort of, hey, we're only living this once, so let's have our fun. There is that feeling behind it.
And again, you mentioned most movies back then, with occasional exceptions where they would do on remote location, but most of them were made in the studios on sound stages, so all the actors and actresses were in one basic place, and they hung out at these same bars and nightclubs, right? So that kind of brought them all together more frequently.
Yeah, I think that's That's really a good point. And what you find when you Ed and I did another book on writers called Hemingway and Bailey's Bartending Guide to Great American Writers, and it was famous hard-drinking writers. But what you find, and we found it with the stars in Hollywood, as we did with the writers, is it becomes there are groups that form, there are clusters of pals in places, and so it becomes a much smaller world, and you see lots of overlaps of different people across different eras in the same venue or with the same group of drinkers, and so the world shrinks in that way, and a lot of them seem to have kind of palled around with each other, across time. So that's nice.
Name of the book is Of All the Gin Joints, Stumbling Through Hollywood History. We've been talking with Mark Bailey and Edward Hemingway today. And gentlemen, you have a website you want to give out for the book, or maybe your website?
Yes, you can find both of us. You can find me at edwardhemingway.com, and you can find Mark at markbaileyWriter.com.
Great. And again, it's one of those type of books you can pick up, read a few of these stories, and look at the great characters. Like you said, a little bit of skew, so I guess you can pour yourself a Jack Daniels or whatever you like to drink and read it. Might help, right? Make it more interesting.
You can make one of the cocktails in the book and sit down with it.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Congratulations
Thank you,
on the book, and hopefully we can do it again.
Okay.